CyberArk is at the forefront of demonstrating how identity security can help prevent and block a ransomware infection before it brings a business down. CyberArk offers protection along every aspect of the attack chain, from the initial intrusion all the way through data exfiltration. Whether you are proactively building your security program or need to restore trust in your IT environment, CyberArk has the experience to help. Learn how at securityweekly.com/CyberArk.
Picture your team being able to map out the external attack surface as it grows and see the same attack vectors as a hacker does. Most tools out there do asset discovery, but stop there. Enter Detectify. It takes an inventory of exposed web assets and automates vulnerability testing for security misconfigurations, expiring subdomains, and risks in third-party software. Here's the cool part. They crowdsource payloads from leading ethical hackers. It finds bugs you actually want to fix and finds them in time. Start a free 2-week trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, our Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. All right, for our second interview today, we have two guests. The topic is where to start your passwordless journey, real use cases and best practices. And I actually picked it out of a lineup of talks for the Identiverse 2022 conference, which is happening in mid-June. And I'll have some actual details on when the talk is, which day of the event, and a little more details on the event. I'll share that right at the end of this interview before we move on to the next segment. But our first guest is Jackie Komp, VP Sales at Nok Nok. She is responsible for worldwide sales at Nok Nok and has been a part of the cybersecurity industry like from day one, it seems like. I was checking out her LinkedIn, and she was working for Symantec back in the late 80s, or whatever name Symantec had back then. I can't remember if it's just McAfee who went through numerous name changes or Symantec did also. She's also an active yogi, which it probably has something to do with keeping her sane through all those years in this crazy industry. Welcome to the show, Jackie.
Thanks so much. And you're 100% right. It keeps me sane. Also, thanks for aging me on the 80s and Symantec comment, but it has been a long journey.
I was shocked. I was thinking like we were probably, a little bit closer in age. And I saw that. I was like, there's no way.
Yep. Been around for a while. But it's been a good journey.
Yeah, apparently in your yogi powers have allowed you to slow the aging process. Or there you go. You just started really young.
Yeah.
Also with us, we have Rolf Lindermann, VP of Products at Nok Nok. He's responsible for product strategy and development there and has over 20 years of experience in product management, R&D, and operations in IT security. He is also one of the leading experts in FIDO, which we'll talk about a bit later as well. And Rolf also worked at Symantec. I don't know if you folks worked there at the same time, but he worked on some really cool stuff there, like device authentication in smart grids and mobile networks. Welcome to the show, Rolf.
Thank you very much. Welcome. And yes, indeed, we worked there at the same time. Were acquired through a company by Symantec, and then ended up in Symantec, and then started Nok Nok.
Very good. Yeah. So this is so part of the reason that I picked this one out is we've seen a lot of new startups in the industry talking about passwordless, and we've seen some cases on the consumer side. Like I think Microsoft was a big example where, if you have like the Microsoft account you use for their consumer services, they now allow you to just delete your password and get rid of it, and you can use other factors of authentication. But I hadn't really seen any real good enterprise use cases or stories about what it's like to actually migrate to passwordless. And in some cases, I've heard stories that people aren't even necessarily comfortable with getting rid of passwords. Like it's such a big part of our culture, and people are so trained and have so many habits formed around using passwords on things. I guess maybe they feel a little naked without a password. Like it's a big shift, I think, psychologically for people going down this path.
Yeah, it really is, and that shift started even earlier. You might remember at the time, I think it was around 2015, where the first biometric sensors reached the smartphones, or maybe not the first, but it hit smartphones really in a big wave. And that shifted the behavior of many users to now unlock smartphones with a biometric, right? And then people also asked, what else could I use my biometric for? And this is where people thought about other things. And in fact, we started even earlier, right? We started in 2012 thinking about solutions to get rid of the password and at least reduce the reliance step by step, and then to finally get rid of passwords. And that's where we started the journey. And we are happy that now all the large companies have joined the FIDO Alliance and have actually implemented that technology, are pushing out passwordless technology to make the internet more secure and more convenient for users.
And the whole purpose of the FIDO Alliance seems like it's somewhat around developing these other factors of authentication so we can reduce reliance on passwords, right?
Exactly. That is the whole purpose. And especially in the consumer scenario, right? In enterprise scenarios, you could give security keys or dedicated security tokens to your users, to your employees, to the enterprise. In the consumer space, that doesn't really scale. And so we needed to find solutions that would scale, and that consumers could just use their normal devices to do daily authentication in a more secure manner.
Yeah.
So how does that actually work for a consumer? Like what is the technology? Is it a phone? Is it presence? Is it location? Is it biometrics passing through as FIDO? Like, how's that working?
So reality is it's many of those things. The fundamental shift was really to stop using the secrets that you remember and had to give to a server, right, to be stored on servers, because those secrets have been stolen, right? Over 8 billion passwords have been stolen from servers, and they could be given to the wrong people, like the man in the middle, and that is where phishing attacks come in, right? And that is one of the major issues we see today. And so we, in the FIDO Alliance, created in a security standard where a possession factor, what we call an authenticator, could be a dedicated token, but could also be an integral part of your smartphone, your tablet, or your PC, right, would be used as such an authenticator, and that the user would have to do some gesture to that device, like a fingerprint, facial recognition, or Face ID, right, or entering a PIN or any other biometric to unlock the use of a cryptographic secret. And this really shifted the industry, because now it became convenient to do the authentication, number one, and second, it became very secure, right? It protects against phishing, and all the existing, even the two-step methods, do not protect against phishing.
So, question for you. With some other standards and technologies, like take Wi-Fi, for example, 802.11, we've actually seen protocols broken out between business and consumer. We've seen enterprise authentication protocols and then consumer authentication protocols. And I wonder, kind of with the pandemic, people working from home, and kind of we've seen an increase in the consumerization of even enterprise security products, where more and more the expectation of employees is for things to be enterprise tasks and enterprise products to be as easy to use as consumer products. With FIDO and some of the stuff that you're working on, do we continue to see kind of the two branches, enterprises will put up with some extra friction and things like that versus consumer, or is it all just kind of merging together?
We think it's converging to a single technology, right? It's really in the end, it's users accessing services, right? Sometimes the user acts as a person, right, to do personal stuff on a bring your own device system, and sometimes that user happens to be an employee and wants to access enterprise systems, right? Especially now in the COVID pandemic, we have seen a lot of movement to the work from home scenario, where people started to do the home office and use their own IT equipment, right? And now this is really the situation where FIDO is a very good protocol to use, because it gives us the security level you need for the enterprise, but also for large consumer-focused organizations. And it's so convenient to be used. And that is what we also see in the enterprise, right? That there is a movement to say, I have my smartphone, that should be enough for me to authenticate, or I have my tablet or my PC. I do not want to carry additional security devices around.
So in that line, I mean, traditionally we've had the employer issued multi-factor token, whether it's the phone or whatever, and then you have your personal one. Do you see a convergence, or do you think employers will want to keep to a higher fidelity, higher assurance authenticator than just the average consumer has?
So we see that consumer companies have to accept any authenticator, where enterprises could be a little more selective and say there are specific authenticators you have to use if you want to access that service, especially for high security services. But the underlying protocol is the same. And I think this is the beauty here with the FIDO approach, that you can use the same device and the same protocol and just have a different configuration of the system to make that effective, both for enterprises in the workforce authentication scenario and for the companies in the consumer authentication scenario.
That would be really awesome, because acceptance is going to be key. I mean, I'm sure some people, if you don't take away their password, only allow other estimates, they're going to feel like you took something cherished away. But from a cyber perspective, I would love to see this become just SOP, that we don't use them anymore, except in some sort of disaster.
Now two perspectives, right? The one is, what is the user's perception of the security? And the second is, what is the objective security level which attackers care mostly, right? And the password might be perceived sometimes as very secure, and people have been trained over years to come up with complex passwords. But reality is, for a man in the middle, right, it doesn't matter how complex a password is or the OTP, it can be phished, right? So we need to come up with more secure methods, and it will take some time, as the addition of biometric sensors to smartphones also did, right, to shift the user perception, right, and connect that back to the reality again, which has changed.
Do you think some of that adoption actually could be pushed down to the consumer by getting the enterprises more on board, leveraging things like Azure AD, FIDO with the single sign-on and SAML being accepted across the enterprise, and having those enterprise offer the consumers a personal version of this service or software because they're already used to using it in the enterprise for their job? Do you think we can actually reverse that and have a wider, easier acceptance by getting this pushed faster and further through the enterprise solutions?
Yeah. Jackie.
No, I was just going to say, I think that, what will help really users continue to adopt it is what was mentioned earlier, like with Microsoft making it available. As more and more of the larger organizations are rolling out these capabilities to consumers, they're going to become more used to it. You hit the nail on the head initially, is that people are used to passwords. They hate them, but they're used to them. And no one thought biometrics would take off on the phones, as Rolf was saying. It took years, but now everybody, or most people, will use, if offered, Touch ID or Face ID on their phones when offered on a native mobile app. And then this just extends that concept into the web apps as well, which users aren't aren't yet used to using. They're used to using a biometric, let's say on their phone, to access a digital service, but they're not quite used to using that on their PCs yet. But it's just a matter of time as more and more relying parties are offering this to access the digital services, that yes, it will train users. It's much more convenient. It is much more secure. It's a journey. And so this is partly what our talk is about, is that this does not happen overnight. And so what we do is we work with relying parties, very large global brands. They're typically in regulated markets like banks and mobile network operators, initially insurance companies, where they really care about security, but they also see convenience as a competitive advantage. And so we'll start working with them to incorporate passwordless into use cases. So it's not a light switch, and that's what we cover in this session that we're going to do at Identiverse, is to highlight companies and some of the use cases that they've started with, and how over time they can continue to reduce their reliance on the password, get their consumers comfortable with it. And what I like to say is they really do have these huge pots of gold along the way. I mean, really material benefits to not only reduction in account takeover and fraud, but in things like improved onboarding success, faster sign-in speed, greater sign-in success, reduced operational costs with password resets. So it's really pretty exciting, but it is a journey. And but I do think that the train has left the track, and you're going to see more and more organizations. And we can talk later too. There's some movements that Rolf can talk about in the industry with Apple and Google and Microsoft, where they're also introducing some new capabilities that just continue to make that whole journey easier for users and for relying parties.
As security practitioners, we really do need to hear what you guys have to say and kind of adopt this. We've been preaching getting away from passwords as a source of identity and integrity for a long time. We just haven't had good guidance to move towards. And so providing that conversation piece and good information on initiatives to get involved in and be able to speak intelligently to the deployment and the caveats to deploying it, because really that's the first question in operations you're going to get asked is, all right, what's it going to break and how much does it cost? Those are probably the first two you get. And so getting that adoption and having some of those things to speak towards and having some of those bigger names behind you is fantastic. And as soon as you guys make the leap over to identity and remove the attacker's monetary value of an identity and get us, a voter card that's all secured with FIDO and an identity that's not a social security number, I'm going to go take you guys out for a lot of drinks.
Yeah, well, that is definitely, all of that good stuff is on the horizon. And Rolf is actually, he's very modest in his introductions. He's actually one of the leading experts in the world on this FIDO stuff and works with a lot of regulatory bodies and is involved in a lot of conversations around digital identity. So there's really great stuff going on. But to your point, I think most people get that they need to make a change. Everyone knows legacy authentication was not meant for this digital world. We've all been talking about passwordless. What I see is that what our customers struggle with is, great, how do I get from here to there, though? What I call transition vision, right? How do I do this? And so there are different ways that you can get started. One thing I will say is that we find once people make the decision strategically that it makes sense to implement a FIDO-based solution, which why wouldn't you? It's in standard. It's supported by all the major browser vendors. You've got Microsoft, Google, even Apple, who tends to not do standards or participating in it and actually driving innovation in it. But it's future-proof, right? It's more cost-effective. So most companies make the decision that they want to do it, and then they sometimes get too caught up in the protocol. They can wrap their head around, UAF and FIDO2 and CTAP, and so we always go time out. Let's talk about the use cases that you want to solve, and then obviously partnering with a company like Nok Nok, we have a platform that just abstracts all that and does whatever protocol it needs to do to solve that use case. And when they start looking at it from the use case perspective, then that's where we start making some progress. And so as an example, one of the first obvious use cases for a lot of our customers is to take a mobile first strategy. A lot of companies really want to lock down their mobile app. And today they might be using Touch ID or Face ID on their mobile apps, but very often they're not doing it in a very cost effective or often even a secure way. Could be caching the password, could be, an auth token that is, can be misused. And a lot of times it's a homegrown type system that operationally costs them a lot. So they say, okay, well, let's start with our mobile app. And once you lock down that app, you can then also start using it to deprecate SMS OTP, because you can use the app for push versus having to use SMS OTP. So that's often a first step. Then once companies have the infrastructure in place, they can start turning on other use cases. And I can give examples of that, but let me pause for a minute and see if Rolf wants to add anything or if you have any questions about that so far.
So you asked, why wouldn't somebody do FIDO? I actually have a reason, because I live in the federal government space. Up until very recently, because FIDO wasn't NIST certified, I couldn't deploy it. It was simply the rule.
That has changed.
Yes, Executive Order 14028 changes that. NIST has got to get off the stick and actually publish their approval. But yeah, that fixes that problem.
Yeah,
like I said, I was just answering your question somewhat.
No, but you're absolutely right.
Don't get that answer very much.
Yeah, that was a major advancement, the executive order, and now it really does. Right? You open up a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, now you can use derived credentials, right, in the federal space with the new FIPS 201 version 4, right? That is, I think, a big achievement, and we have worked for a long time also with NIST and the US government, right, to make those things happen and to educate them on how that protocol works and what the security advantages are. And if you might have seen the SP 863 specification, right? Also reflecting that in the authentication assurance levels, right? And now that we can use FIDO up to AAL3, which is the highest level, right? Which is great, and that's exactly what we wanted to have: a protocol and a solution that is scalable.
Yeah.
Oops, I think we lost you, Rolf. Did we lose him?
We lost your audio, Rolf.
So,
Gus, is that an us thing or was that a him thing?
I think it might. Yeah, let me tell him. I'll just see if I can Skype him in the background. I know he has had a little bit of trouble with his audio, his internet from time to time. So he's asking me if I'm muted. No, we can't hear you.
So it sounds like we lost his.
I want to hear what he had to say.
I think we lost his microphone and speaker at the same time. So maybe whatever device he was using just died or unplugged. Or
yeah, hopefully he'll.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask Jackie. We were talking about the U.S. government changes to allow. Were there any issues overseas with acceptance of FIDO, or has it been, or is it not as much as a thing as the U.S. government had with it?
And Rolf can give more specifics, but no,
I'm sure he can.
There have been acceptance of FIDO as well. For example, the European Banking Association with PSD2 has accepted FIDO as multi-factor credential to meet the requirements of PSD2, which require secure customer authentication. And so a lot of the banks are looking at that. And I know there's been some integration of FIDO in EIDAS. So, but again, that's really, I'm going to have to default to Rolf to speak a little bit more intelligently about that.
So I apologize for a little bit of asking you a Rolf question. But I was hoping you had something you could talk to.
Gave you a couple of little nuggets there.
Yeah, I did want to point out, to Tyler's earlier question about pushing this on the consumer side, that correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, but Nok Nok, like most of your customers are companies that have consumers. So the industry term we'd use is B2B to C use cases rather than B to E, which would be enterprises buying this and using it for their own employees.
Yeah, so there's no reason that our platform can't be used that way. And we actually do have customers who are using it in a B2E use case as well. However, the early adopters of FIDO have been trying to solve the consumer problem. As we said earlier, you can throw friction at your employees and they're not going to quit, right? They'll tolerate more, but with consumers and with, all of the fintechs and a lot of the more elegant ways of people, being able to log in, there's been a real focus on convenience, but obviously it has to be secure. And so, Nok Nok has been around for 10 years, right? We were one of the founders of the 6 founders of the FIDO Alliance. Our founder actually was the inventor of FIDO. So we've been doing this for a long time. And we've worked with a lot of global brands. And as I say, their first focus was, in some ways, what we consider the harder one, which is solving the consumer problem. Because, on the consumer side, your competitor is a click away, right? If you're giving friction, if you're creating problems for your customers, it really does have a very material impact on your business. So we have, and these are some brands I can't talk about, but we do have very large global brands like Verizon, T-Mobile, BBVA. Intuit is a great example of a customer who's done phenomenal things on the consumer side. So they started with the mobile first strategy that we spoke about. And then here's a great use case. They have TurboTax, as people know. And everyone loves doing their taxes, right? And they always remember their passwords. And so what they found was that when people were going to onboard, they would say, give me your name, give me your phone number, give me your email address, put in a password. No, it has to be this many characters. Now type it again. Let me send you an SMS OTP. And that friction was creating transaction abandonment. And so what they did was they said, okay, we're going to ask them for their phone number, and we're going to have them swipe their finger, which when you're doing that, you're putting this key, right? You're binding the user to that device. It's that user the next time they come back. And then as the user began to put more information and, be ready to actually have something to protect, they could, if they wanted, then ask for additional information. So it's kind of progressive profiling where, as the head of identity said there, we're building a fort before they even have anything in it. So, let's work our way up to it. And they had, in a very short time, they had a 10% improvement in onboarding, which you can imagine every percentage, is likely worth millions of dollars. And then they opened it up on their web apps. So we all love using our biometric on our phone, right? It's so convenient. Well, I've got a Mac with a fingerprint. Why won't you let me use that as well? Right? Because then next time I go back to my Mac, I'm back typing a password again. So they implemented that and they got a very high adoption rate, which, we were saying, well, will users use it? Won't they? They got high adoption rate. I think in the first month or so, it was up to like 40% of the people that they offered it to. And they saw 8 times increase in speed of people logging in, because they didn't have to use OTPs to log in. So, they are a great example of how you can go turn on capabilities and then eventually deprecate the password. But it doesn't happen overnight. So sorry, it was kind of a long way of saying, yes, we have focused a lot on consumers or the B2B to C, but one of our customers is using it for their employees. They have 100,000 employees that they're using it to log into their application and then, use single sign-on to get to the rest of their apps. We have another customer who, this is kind of a fun use case. It's a power grid company. I can't tell you their name, who wanted to introduce a new system for their maintenance workers where customers could take pictures of when there's an issue outside and, on a line and send it in. and the maintenance workers would triage it. But they had such complex requirements for passwords to get into the system that the business sponsor basically said, look, we're not going to try to do this business reform if my employees can't even get in. So long story short is they ended up implementing our solution that leverages the biometrics on the device. And, they were able to roll out the program. They met all their KPIs. There was, no incidents of fraud. So we do have both use cases that we address. We've just, as I say, seen a lot of focus on the B2B2C for customers who have come to us.
Yeah, it's really, so my own personal experiences, you mentioned Intuit, and I remember the first time one of my banks turned on multi-factor authentication, and of course I went and tried it. Working in the industry, I felt like I'm always trying the latest gadgets, features, everything. It's just kind of, my thing. I just love everything that's new. And immediately noticed I couldn't use any of these connections that I'd share my account with. So there's a lot of budgeting apps that people use for personal finance, and those log into your application to get those transactions so they can tell you, here's how much you spent on groceries last week or something like that. And, as soon as we started seeing multi-factor and captchas and things like that coming in, like those connections would fail. And then we started seeing these companies like Plaid that would come in and actually provide kind of that middle connection and do whatever, crazy backflips they have to do to get you through that bank's authentication system, captchas or however it works. And it's nice to finally kind of see some standards here, some standardization of how you do that. But it's still somewhat frustrating. I use a mix of credit unions, banks, and neobanks. Again, I said I like to try out new things. And none of them are consistent with how they do authentication or whether they've partnered with Plaid. And, I can easily move money from one system to another. So really looking forward to seeing all those folks standardize everything, because it really is kind of a challenge, I think, for consumers to,
navigate,
to be able to use these, these services the way that they want to use them.
Yeah, no, we agree 100%. And we are in the, beginning of seeing that change. I can tell you, we are working with a lot of organizations that are talking about those issues that you mentioned in terms of, redesigning the way that they share information with other relying parties. And so, as we said in the beginning, it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's definitely making really good progress. And I would encourage any of your listeners, to if they're not familiar with the new standard, to go to the FIDO Alliance website. They can check it out there. They can come to our website. We have a lot of information. We're happy to do briefings. But, the first step is just really understanding what it is and how you can leverage it. And then how to work with the stakeholders within your company to understand this. It's transformational, right? It really is transformational. So it does take time, but it's game changer, really.
So
go ahead, Lee.
This, I hope, is a quick question. I mean, we've mentioned the systems and the end users and B2E, B2C. What about the system admins who want to desperately hold on to a reusable credential? How's that going? Are we going to be able to break that, or maybe we don't fight that battle yet?
Yeah. So privileged access in terms of and when are you comfortable, or do you think they're comfortable using security keys?
No. Well, it's more like a case of, I need this because one day it's going to be broken and it's going to be X o'clock in the morning and I need to get in.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that.
I've been able to talk them out of I've got to use my reusable credential whenever I'm admin. into it's for what I call a break glass account, but I want to get rid of the break glass accounts too. And I just was wondering if you had any traction in that area, or is it too soon to ask that question?
Yeah, I would probably say that that's something I would have Rolf answer, because there's probably a very good technical answer to that of how we get around it. Did he come back in by any chance?
We're still troubleshooting his audio, so we're actively working on that. We we may have to wrap before we get him.
All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. This is one of the reasons I have Rolf always tag team with me on these calls, because he's much more advanced in explaining how we could handle those kinds of situations.
No worries. One thing, not sure if you want to cover if this is also a Rolf thing, but new additions to FIDO. So I think that's one of the things we were going to touch on today, or new things that are being added. Yeah.
So, the two big things that have been announced recently, which have been really all over the news, is that Apple and Google and Microsoft have announced their support and their delivery of what is known as passkeys or multi-device keys. So today with FIDO, you register each device separately, right? Mm-hmm. You put a credential on each device separately. And so in a way, each of those devices is its own circle of trust. And one of the things that's from a user experience that is very different from the password world is that I go to a new device, I can put a password in and get authenticated on that device. Whereas in the FIDO world, you need to register that device first. And so what multi-device keys do is they basically, in a way, are a shared key across a user's family of devices. That only works within a family. So it would work within a family of Apple products or Android products, or with Chrome. And so what that means is that if I have an Apple ID that I'm using on my phone and on my MacBook and on my tablet, once I'm registered, let's say on my phone, and then I go to use my Mac, the relying party has a piece of information that's very valuable. They know that I have a shared account, that this is a device that shares this multi-device key because it's the same Apple ID. Now, for some banks, they might still do step up before they give you, they bootstrap you on that device. They might do an SMS OTP or something to just validate that is you on that device and nobody's stolen your Apple ID. But it really is a way of giving a very important piece of information to a relying party that helps more easily bootstrap a new device for a user or do account recovery. So that's a pretty big movement in the industry. Do you have any questions about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's potentially huge for convenience. It can be painful having to re-log into things from a new device. So being able to share across those, I think I understood that correctly.
Yeah, so you can, right. The multi-device key just lets you know that these are that user's devices, that they share an Apple ID, as an example, is the best way to describe it.
So they're like pre-trusted.
Correct. Right? But then you can put a single device key going forward. So you don't always have to rely on the multi-device key. The multi-device key is just letting you know, hey, these devices are all within Jackie's, Apple ID account. And then you can issue a single device key going forward. But it's a great way to help you bootstrap a new device and basically identify that is that user's device.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry?
Yes,
Rolf,
Can you hear me? Yeah, finally.
Welcome back, Rolf.
Welcome back, Rolf. So, Rolf, we have two questions for you. First, I was just describing, we're running probably short on time, but I was just describing multi-device keys, the passkey movement. I don't know if there's anything very quickly you want to say to summarize multi-device keys to make me look back.
I think you said it well, right? It's really about the user to only register once the entire device family, and then use the phone, the tablet, and the PC, right? And use all the same phishing-resistant credentials on these devices, which makes it much easier to scale and not only replace two-factor tokens, but also replace passwords entirely. And that is, I think, a great achievement now.
Great. And what was the other question we had? I'm sorry, it was on
Lee. We can have Lee re-ask that question.
So the question the last question I was asking was the one of at the sysadmin level. We've talked about our end users, and we talked about where the focus is for the multi-factor, and I'm wondering if there's any traction moving away from I've got to have a password in case everything breaks in the middle of the night and I've got to fix it all. Are we going to be able to get away from that mindset?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we are getting there, and I would say we are already not using that anymore. So today, right, we know that many people forget their password, right? So you already have a password reset or account recovery method in place, and that just changes, right? You could use the same methods going forward, meaning send you an email, right, click on a link and register a new authenticator. But once you can use your smartphone, your tablet, or your PC, right? And if you now switch to a new smartphone, you still can use your tablet, and the new smartphone would inherit that credential automatically, right? Then there is no need to go back and revisit your whatever notes that you might have taken with all the passwords, right? So we get away from those situations, which makes it much more convenient for the users to practically not use any password and even avoid the phishing or the methods that are vulnerable to phishing, which includes send me a message here, right, with an OTP in it, and type that OTP in some other screen where you never know whether that other screen is yours or someone else's.
That's really a good trend, and I'd love to see that go to its as far as it can, because it not having a gap in the authentication or a way to circumvent all the strong authentication we use is kind of a big deal for me. But thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Adrian.
Yeah, and anything else, Jackie or Rolf, you want to share before we wrap up here? I am going to plug the talk that you're giving at Identiverse a little bit before we wrap here, but wanted to make sure we covered all the most important points.
Yeah, we did cover a lot of ground. I just reiterate what we shared earlier is that, this is definitely transformation that companies can get started with today, whether you're a B2B2C or you're, B2E. It is a journey, but there's a lot of value to beginning to get started. We are in the middle of that and very happy to share and help companies that are interested in learning more.
All right. Awesome. Jackie and Rolf, thanks so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thanks for having us. It's great speaking with you guys. Here's to Passwordless. Yeah. So if you want to hear those specific, I think they mentioned in the talk abstract that they have 5 real use cases that they're going to share in that talk. So if you want to hear more about that, Identiverse 2022 runs from June 21st through June 24th in Denver, Colorado. And their talk, Where to Start Your Passwordless Customer Journey, 5 Real Deployment Use Cases and Best Practices, will be at 5:30 p.m. on the first day of the conference, Tuesday, June 21st. All right, and with that, we'll be back in a few moments with the Weekly Enterprise News.